What if silence wasn't weakness, but your greatest weapon? You didn't chase. You didn't explain. You didn't try to fix what they chose to break. And that's what shattered them. Because they expected you to react, to beg, to fall apart. But you didn't. They thought you'd fight for their attention. Instead, you disappeared into calm. That silence, it was louder than any argument, more haunting than any confession. And in that silence, they were left to face the one thing they didn't expect, the weight of your absence. This isn't about playing cold, it's about power, stoic power. When you master your emotions and choose not to respond, you show the one thing no one can fake, inner strength. You didn't need to do anything dramatic. You just had to stop giving them the reaction they were counting on. So if you're ready to harness the strength of stillness, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. Silence is my strength. Let's dive in. Number 1. The strength in saying nothing. There comes a moment when silence speaks louder than any apology, any defense, any last attempt to be understood. That moment arrives when you finally realize that not every story deserves closure, and not every person deserves your explanation. You don't owe clarity to someone who chose chaos. And so, instead of reacting, you go quiet. Not because you're weak, but because you've chosen peace over participation. It feels counterintuitive. We're conditioned to chase resolution, to say the last word, to correct the narrative. But every time you speak to someone who's already decided who you are, you offer them more power to distort your truth. Silence, then, becomes your rebellion. Not dramatic, not bitter, just unwavering, a signal that you no longer seek to be heard by those who refused to listen. And in this silence, something radical happens. The dynamic flips. You are no longer the one trying to hold together the broken threads. You step back and let the entire structure collapse without your hands propping it up. What's left is space, vast, unsettling, and healing. Stoicism teaches us that control begins with the refusal to be emotionally manipulated. When you respond with silence, you reclaim the frame. You no longer play in their theater of drama, guilt, or blame. You walk off stage and let the curtain fall. Your withdrawal is not a tactic, it is a declaration that your well-being matters more than their opinion, that your self-respect is louder than their noise. Think of silence like a sealed door. Behind it is everything they no longer have access to. Your kindness, your time, your attention. They may knock, they may shout, but you don't open it. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Because once you've seen the cost of over-explaining yourself to someone who only wants to misunderstand, you learn the value of stillness. And yes, they'll feel it. The absence, the shift, the quiet where chaos used to be, and it will haunt them. Not because you punish them, but because you finally stopped playing along. That's what they didn't expect. That's what they can't control, and that's what begins to unravel the illusion they were holding on to. If you've chosen silence not as a weapon but as a form of self-respect, comment below. I protect my peace, even if it means disappearing. Number 2. Time doesn't forget, it reveals. When you finally step away and let the silence stretch, it feels like nothing is happening. No reaction, no apology, no sign that they even noticed your absence. It can be disorienting, even painful, to walk away without a scene, without a last word, without the echo of their footsteps behind you. But that's where most people misunderstand the power of distance. It's not immediate, it's cumulative. Time moves slowly at first. The days are quiet. You wonder if they miss you, if they even care. But time, when used with patience and discipline, is not your enemy. It's your ally. Because time doesn't just pass, it clarifies. It strips away illusions, and if your presence had weight, if your energy ever mattered, it will start to show, not in what they say, but in what they begin to feel. Your absence becomes a shadow in their routine, not all at once, but gradually. The habits that once included you now end in silence. The little comforts you brought, your voice, your support, your stability, are no longer there to cushion their world, and the space you left doesn't stay neutral. It grows heavier, day by day. Stoicism doesn't promise revenge, it promises revelation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Time is a sort of river of passing events, and strong is its current. That current washes away the superficial and reveals what's real. If your presence was real, if your value was taken for granted, time will make it undeniable. Not for you, but for them." You don't need to check in. You don't need to post to prove you're doing well. You just need to stay grounded and let the silence speak. Let the days stack. Let their mind replay what they once dismissed. Because the more they try to fill your absence with noise, the more they'll realize it wasn't noise you gave them, it was peace. And when that realization hits, it's not always loud. Sometimes it comes in the middle of a quiet evening, a random photo, a familiar song, and suddenly your absence is undeniable. Not dramatic, just undeniable. So you don't wait for a message. You don't need validation, because time is doing what it does best, showing who really stayed and who only noticed once it was too late. If you trust the silence and let time speak for you, comment below. I don't chase proof. Time will show what I meant. Number 3. When familiarity becomes a ghost. You were once a fixture in their life, predictable, reliable, present. The good morning messages, the calls, the small rituals that stitched your existence into theirs. You didn't even need to be extraordinary. You were simply there, and in that constancy, you became part of their internal rhythm, a comfort, a given. Until one day, you weren't. And that's when everything shifts, because what's familiar is rarely appreciated until it becomes absent. At first, they feel relief, freedom, space. They convince themselves they're lighter without you. But what they mistake for liberation is often just the silence before the echo, because slowly the space you once filled becomes a hollow note in their day. The rhythm falters, the warmth fades. The familiar comfort now feels like a chill they can't place. This is where absence becomes more powerful than presence, because when someone has grown used to your energy, your care, your patience, removing it is not just subtraction, it's a haunting, a phantom limb of connection they can no longer reach. They try to replace you, fill the space with distractions, new people, new hobbies, louder noise. But nothing fits quite right. Nothing hums at the same frequency. Stoicism isn't about being unforgettable. It's about living with such integrity, such presence, that when you remove yourself, your absence holds its own gravity. Seneca said, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." And that's exactly what they begin to do, suffering not from what's happening, but from the weight of what they didn't see slipping away. Your silence isn't just absence, it's contrast. They remember how steady you were, how consistent, how they could count on you, even when they didn't say it. And now that you're gone, they're not missing drama, they're not missing chaos, they're missing the peace they didn't know they needed, until it disappeared. You don't need to remind them, you don't need to make noise. Your quiet withdrawal becomes the loudest presence in their life, and it doesn't fade, it lingers. Because what they lost wasn't just a person, it was the version of themselves that felt safe, understood, and held when you were around. If your absence now carries more weight than your presence ever demanded, comment below. I became irreplaceable the moment I walked away. Number 4. From ego to regret. The slow collapse of control. At first, they didn't flinch. They didn't panic when your presence disappeared. In fact, they leaned into it, laughed a little louder, posted a little more. There was a confidence, an ego-filled certainty that you'd be back, that your silence was temporary, a tactic, a moment of weakness you couldn't sustain. They believed you still revolved around their orbit, and maybe part of you did. But time has a way of revealing where the real gravity lies, and as the days stretch without a single word from you, without a glance, without the predictable return, they begin to feel it. First, it's subtle. A pause before checking their phone, a strange hollowness in moments they use to fill by reacting to you. Then it sharpens, the confidence dulls, the ego begins to crack. Because here's what they never considered, that your silence wasn't a strategy, it was a decision rooted in strength, not spite, that you had finally chosen yourself over the cycle, over explanation, over trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. And in that quiet commitment to yourself, you did something their ego couldn't predict. You didn't come back. That's when regret slips in, not with fanfare, but in stillness, in long evenings, in quiet reminders. They start to remember what they dismissed, replay what they minimized, the loyalty, the patience, the effort. They start to see it now, not as weakness, but as value, as something they squandered while assuming it would always be there. Stoicism teaches us that control over others is an illusion. The only true power is mastery over the self. And in mastering your silence, in refusing to break the peace you've built, you become untouchable. They can't reach you with guilt. They can't bait you with noise, because you've stepped outside their reach, not in distance, but in discipline. Their ego can't hold the story anymore. It crumbles under the weight of what they can no longer deny, that you were worth more than they admitted, that your presence was a privilege, not a default, and now it's gone. Not because you wanted to punish them, but because you finally refused to punish yourself. If you felt the shift from being doubted to being deeply missed, comment below. Their ego expected my return, but I chose my peace instead. Number 5. When silence becomes the final word. You used to explain yourself. You used to overthink every message, crafting responses that walked the tightrope between honesty and self-protection. You tried to be understood, to stay graceful, patient, even forgiving. Long past the point where it was deserved, but now you've said nothing. Not because you're bitter, but because you finally realized that some people don't need answers. They need consequence. And the greatest consequence is absence. Without closure, without drama, without ceremony. Just a door quietly closing, never slammed, never locked. Just no longer open. That's what silence is. It's not a game. It's not manipulation. It's a boundary. The most powerful kind. The one that doesn't need to be announced to be respected. They don't hear your side of the story now. They don't know what you're thinking, and that unsettles them far more than any confrontation would have. Because when someone no longer reacts, when they no longer seek to explain or defend, it becomes clear their peace is no longer available for negotiation. Stoicism reminds us that we must never place our serenity in the hands of others. Seneca wrote, "No man was ever wise by chance." And wisdom in this case looks like restraint, like knowing that your silence is not a lack of strength, but its highest form. You've chosen to say less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to be heard by someone who chose not to listen. Now, they fill in the blanks. They replay the story on their own, hearing your silence echo in places where words once were. They wanted a reaction, and instead they got distance. They wanted a fight, and instead they got stillness. And in that stillness, they're left to sit with what they did, without your voice there to soften the blow. There is no greater message than silence from someone who once poured out their heart. It forces a confrontation, not between you and them, but between them and themselves. And that confrontation, it lingers, it grows, it changes them. So if you've chosen to let silence carry the message you once tried to explain, if you've finally understood that peace isn't something you ask for, it's something you protect, then you've already won. Comment below if you're done talking. My silence isn't empty, it says everything I no longer will. Number 6. Each quiet day is a reminder they can't escape. You think they've moved on, that they don't notice your absence, that their silence means peace. But silence is deceptive. It echoes louder in solitude than it ever could in sound. And every day that passes without you becomes less of a routine and more of a reckoning. Because even if they never say it, they're not just adjusting to life without you. They're feeling the hollowness of everything that once felt full. At first it's manageable. They fill the gap with noise, new conversations, fleeting distractions, shallow comforts. But slowly those placeholders lose their weight. The things that once lit up their day now feel dull. Because none of it carries your energy, your steadiness, your depth. You weren't just a part of their day, you were the structure around which it was built. And now that it's gone, everything leans to one side. They scroll past old messages, not to relive joy, but to measure loss. They walk past familiar places with the sudden heaviness of memory, not because they miss you in a dramatic way, but because your absence keeps showing up in the spaces they thought you'd always occupy. You don't need to send a signal. You've become one. Stoicism isn't about making them miss you. It's about releasing your need to be missed. And yet, paradoxically, when you detach with calm dignity, you create the very presence they can't replace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." You've done exactly that. You stepped away with grace. You chose peace over performance. And now, every silent day builds weight, not because you're trying, but because you've stopped. Each day they don't hear from you, each day you don't appear in their orbit, becomes another brick in the realization they tried to avoid. They didn't lose someone replaceable. They lost someone who never needed to prove their worth in the first place. And the quiet reminds them of that over and over again. You've become not a wound, but a presence. The kind that lingers, that teaches by being gone, that forces reflection by offering no further explanation. If your stillness now speaks more clearly than your presence ever did, comment below. Every day I stay silent is a day they feel the truth. Number 7. The mystery of your silence becomes their undoing. You used to be predictable, always showing up, always explaining, always making sure they understood your intentions. And because they could read you so clearly, they never truly feared losing you. But now, everything has changed. Your silence isn't just quiet, it's confusing. You've stepped out of their emotional blueprint, and suddenly they no longer know who you are, where you are, or how you feel. This unknown becomes their chaos, not because you've done something wrong, but because you've stopped being available for their certainty. You've removed the familiar markers they relied on to maintain control. No more late-night messages, no more reactions, no more clues. Just absence, unpredictable, unreadable, and undeniably real. And in that mystery, something powerful begins to stir, not in you, but in them. Their ego, once so sure, begins to tremble. They can no longer decode your behavior because you've stopped performing. You've stopped broadcasting your worth. You're no longer a story they can narrate. You've become a silence they can't translate. The Stoics knew the value of being unfazed, unreadable, unbothered. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But now, it's not even about reaction, it's about evolution. You've risen beyond their reach, not out of spite, but out of stillness. You've become a question they don't know how to answer, and that question gnaws at them in ways no argument ever could. Because people aren't driven mad by anger, they're driven mad by uncertainty. And when someone goes from being able to predict your every move to having no idea who you've become, their mind fills the gaps with stories, with doubts, with fear. The longer you stay silent, the louder their thoughts become. You didn't leave breadcrumbs. You didn't craft a trail back to you. And now they're not just wondering if you've moved on. They're wondering who you might be without them. And that's the real fear. Not that you're gone, but that you're better, stronger, freer, and no longer tied to the role they once placed you in. So if your silence has become the mystery that unsettles their control, comment below. The less they know about me now, the more they question everything. You began in pain, holding back every impulse to reach out. But now you understand. That restraint was your revolution. Your words didn't break them. Your composure broke them. Your value was never proven in pursuit, but revealed in your stillness. You didn't need closure. You became the closure. If this message resonates with the strength you're building, like this video, subscribe, and comment below. I am unshakable. Hold the line, trust the silence, and remember, real power doesn't make noise. It makes impact.